library here, so I do. Anthony, my husband talking. Anthony told me not to say very much, and I'll try not to say very much. But the trouble is, in an exhibition which is about emptiness, I thought you might need a little bit of filling in. It's extremely. It's such a wonderful, welcome thing to see Anthony, reaching a point which seems to be entirely organic. I mean, he seems to have always had this incredible sense of purpose. I hate to feel that, I hate to know, I'm not very good at arithmetic, but Anthony and I have known each other for an awful long time. We're
nearly
heading for 50. I can't believe that. I mean, I really, looking at you, I better not look at me, but I can't believe that it's so long. But Anthony's always seemed to have known where he's going. You know, got lots of friends who didn't really know where they were going. But the thing about Anthony, whether he was painting, whether he was doing life drawing, which he's always done, and what's so beautiful, I think, is that here in this 36 views, this homage to Hokusai, the views of Croagh Patrick, Anthony has reached the most wonderful point where he seems to be thoroughly happy in County Mayo, deeply cognizant of the landscape and all its different moods, and aware that Croagh Patrick isn't just a sort of Christian pilgrimage route, but is an ancient mountain, a holy mountain. And also he's been able to incorporate in the wittiest way the mountain and the human body, because I think Anthony's always had bodies very much in mind and in hand. I think, you know, whether we're looking at... I always used to love how Anthony would make... Yun Tien, do you remember? When you did drawings of the model, you know, some people, who I won't name, you know, would do tiny little stick-like people, but Anthony's were always wonderfully fulsome. And it was the same when you were making violins and viols, or when you were singing, which was always so beautiful, or whether you were meditating. It was a terrible time when, remember, you tried to teach me Sanskrit. It was very unsuccessful. But you always did the most beautiful writing, whether it was in Hindi or whether it was in, you know, what your writing's always been beautiful. And I've always admired so much your pursuit of perfection, which I don't think is a sort of pursuit in the sense of it's a striving. It's just, it was an expectation that perfection of some sort was what you were questing for. And I think this sense, you've been writing these emails, which I've just been absorbing and putting in a file called Anto, but you say in some of these, and I'm just going to read out a few of them, and I'm sure that most of you actually know Anto pretty well, so you'll be able to tune in. But this idea that the journey into the unknown, when you said, is the spiritual core of your art and life, this is a sort of extraordinary humility, and I think also this sense of striving, or I shouldn't use the word striving, but being aware that there is a need to abandon yourself to chance and to the elements, and that the unexpected should always be welcomed, and that to be open to that is a very, very difficult thing to be. I think we all have a tendency to become ritualized in a preclusive way rather than in an open way. And what's so interesting about this exhibition is that Mark gave Anto the brief of Moo and so Anto has called it the emptiness of bowls, because you're the one who's actually making the things. And you say that in its original Buddhist context the word meant not, and over time it took on the added meanings of emptiness and impermanence, not having substance. This idea of everything being in flux. And of course, if you're working with fire and water and air and earth, what we can see down there is the extraordinary expression of Anthony's life of skill, but also his sensibility and his knowledge not being used in a rational way, but being an instinctive way, in the production of bowls, which I wonder if any of us realise how complex they are. And because you've been through so many different permutations. I mean, our kitchen is hung with your beautifully painted sort of Cardew-esque earthenware, but it's since you've started stoneware, this ash-glazes, There's been over the last 10 years or something, this sort of thing. And I can't believe the skill that you've reached in this time. And the idea of using well, not using, but enjoying, and almost, you say, becoming addicted to the idea of going through this extraordinary process where you become lost. And then you're absolutely at the mercy of the elements. But also you have to, I suppose it's a bit like being a musician in a way, in that you've got to orchestrate because you've got to know what temperature to do something at. But then you've also got to know when to stop, which is amazing. And you've also, Anthony was explaining this afternoon about the rims, which, you know, you have to know, you've got to take a stand, but at the same time you have to allow the materials that you're working with to respond to your body. So this body thing comes in, and these bowls are little bodies that they express emptiness. I have a very dear friend who I've just been staying with, which is why I got a cold, because we went swimming at 8 o'clock in the morning in a very cold pond. But she said you must look at Suzuki for Mu, because I was trying to understand this idea. I mean, Anthony says, you know, it's this idea of losing the conscious self, and he says that you have to go to a place. He says, why do you wander about neglecting your own precious treasure at home? And what Anthony has done, I think, has found in Mayo, which I hadn't realised you had such long family associations with, which is very special. I mean, you know, to find your earth. I don't know how many people in this room have found their earth. I must say I do love Wicklow very much. But, you know, finding your place where you can make something. But Anthony's not only just found his place where he can be, but he's using the earth. I mean, you know that these ash glazes, some of them are coming from your friend's Aga ashes, you know, and then you have your cousin in England sending over the same tree and ashes from his tree, and I gather Surrey and Mayo produce different. Is it
Colours, yeah.
What tree makes different ash? Beech ash. But it's this sensitivity and sensibility, and actually Anto also dropped today, which this afternoon, just in the course of conversation, that, you know, he could compare them and be inspired by, you know, this extraordinary collection of Chinese bowls that he's assembled. So his points of reference aren't just, you know, books or looking at, you know, Shetsu Yanagi, or looking at Suzuki, or looking at other texts that I've been looking at, but he's looking at the real thing, the 8th century Chinese bowl or 10th century Chinese bowl. I was looking at this, which is a catalogue of Sung ceramics, because you'll see that Anthony, not only is he looking at these things, but he's able to understand what they are in those extraordinary ribbed tenmoku bowls. I think they've gone down again, but they were being lovingly cradled by Mark, one of them was, the other day, with its ribs, of course, again, ribs, you know, neck. Rim, do we have a rim? I suppose we probably don't really. We've got feet though, haven't we? And we've got stems. I suppose we've got long legs. But you know, but this junware that he's done, those beautiful, beautiful blue bowls, you know, have been made in China for what, thousands of years? I mean, it's extraordinary. So you're touching elements which are, you know, which have been going on for so long. And I think that they are meditation pieces of great, great beauty. I just say the idea of going to your place and finding where it is. Also, another thing that Suzuki says, that all things have the character of emptiness. They have no beginning, no end. They are faultless and not faultless. They are not perfect and they are not imperfect. Therefore, here is, in this emptiness, there is no form, no perception, no name, no concepts, no knowledge. When the impediments of consciousness are annihilated, then a man can, or whatever, a human being can become free of all fear, beyond the reach of change. But the thing is, all the quietness and emptiness one might desire in the midst of most active meditation lies within. And I think Anthony, in this concept of emptiness, is something which, so the bowl is a void, but it's also something that can transport you. So you are being given this experience that Anthony has gone through a really very long ritual in understanding. I mean, the skill is one thing. I mean, if you look into those bowls, have you all been looking into the bowls? I mean, it's incredibly beautiful. You sort of go on little journeys through them, these glazes. I mean, they're unbelievably beautiful. They're unbelievably beautiful forms. And also, as Anthony says, they are to be touched. They're so light. I thought they were going to be really chunky and heavy, and they're not. They're very, very beautiful and light. And I think he's reached something rather amazing. Anyway, there's lots of wonderful things about Zen, but I think Anthony's definitely on a path that's rather special here. And of course, it's the result of study, it's the result of experience, and it's the result of probably, there are many, many, many pots which haven't reached perfection, but in each one there may be something which has led you on this path. And I think also it's the ritual of making which is so beautifully realised. It's very interesting. I didn't realise that Chinese tea bowls, I always thought it was Japanese tea bowls. I hadn't realised that this whole thing. So, I mean, would you be very appalled if anybody actually put something in one of those bowls? Of course not. We wouldn't mind if anybody actually drank tea out of them, because they're so beautiful. You almost feel that a foreign liquid might be. And also, but Anthony also says they must be accessible. And I think that you say also in one of your emails that the challenge is to make work which combines unself-conscious expression with fluidity of making, and I can't possibly think that anybody could possibly show that more beautifully. And that, you know, this ritual of repeated throwing, this way of going through, I suppose, a sort of form of but it's spiritual and physical practice. Which I don't think you would do without. I mean, obviously, I know you've been meditating for years and years and years and years, but at the same time, you've also been making for years and years and years. And this is what I think is so beautiful about this exhibition. Anthony hasn't had, I mean, 1990s, I think, is your first solo exhibition for quite a long time, isn't it? But it seems to bring so many things together. And I think, you know, because obviously the mountain, the Kirkpatrick views are not voids. I mean, they're responses to the landscape, to nature, and they're incredibly beautiful. But here, stimulated by the demands, and you say on the catalogue that emptiness is not a style but a goal, a rare moment of stillness in activity. And I think when we look at that, I mean, there are no words for that. You just, when you look at them, you realise how beautiful they are. And as you say, it's something that you'll continue to do all the time. Shetsu Yonagi, who you're slightly dismissive of actually in the email that you sent me, but you know, who was Japanese, who worked very closely with Bernard Leach and wrote a book called The Unknown Craftsman, a Japanese insight into beauty, wrote that there are many ways of seeing, but the truest and best is with the intuition, for it takes in the whole, whereas the intellect only takes in a part. He says, springing from life, pattern must itself be alive or it's nothing. And I think some of the spirals, I mean, in those beautiful oil point bowls, I mean, you feel you're moving with the vortex and disappearing into the very bottom of the bowl. And that sense of, it's not pattern as we know it, but it's a sort of movement which has been captured through your brushwork, which is absolutely extraordinary. Yanagi says, the maker of a pattern draws the essence of the thing seen with his own heartbeat. Life to life, which I think is the most beautiful sentence. And you really do feel that. It's this incredible strength and energy. You talk about your muscles in the catalogue, the programme. You know, that it's your muscles that orchestrate it, but it's much more than that, I think, isn't it? He says that since pattern is a portrayal of essence, all non-essentials must be stripped away. There is no wordy explanation, here's me talking all the time, there must be the speech without words, me again, of Zen. The kind of pattern I'm speaking of is not primarily decorative. It comes of Zen emptiness, of mu, void, of thusness. In its placidity there must be movement. It lives in that no man's land where eloquence and silence are one. Without both it dies. And I think it's quite extraordinary that Anthony has been able to do this. I think that it's extraordinary to think that just that, you know, what you might throw away from your agar and possibly put on your artichokes is actually making these incredible glazes. And you can go from, I mean, if Anthony, I wish Anthony would, can you do a talk or something as well? We'd all have to sort of take a magic potion and become teeny, because but you know how that one glaze can be the same depending on what it's fired at, what temperature it's fired at, and whether it becomes shiny. It is alchemy. It's a sort of alchemy which you mastered absolutely beautifully. There's another essay which is one of my favourite books called by Peter Fuller called Images of God, The Consolations of Lost Illusions. He says the making of handmade pots matters. It has often been pointed out that the well-made pot is always in some sense symbolic of the human body or person, which is one reason why touch and what Cardew once called the kindness of a pot are so important. Flesh is seen metaphorically as human clay, just as to the potter himself is body. Clay is body. So it's this extraordinary sort of anthropomorphic element, which I think we're not looking at bodies as such, but we are looking at empty bodies downstairs. He also says the pot rises up at once from the hands of its maker. The inertly physical clay is transformed by imagination and skill. The individual expresses himself through transfiguring, without rejecting, both inert stuff and the constraints handed down by tradition. And trying to remain true to it. I can't understand how so that you know that one moment when you have to stop must be so incredibly difficult. I mean, obviously I don't want to go on talking more than I can, but I just admire so much what Anthony has done. I think those oil spot glazes are extraordinary. Anthony says that they demand very slow, carefully controlled firing to 1300 degrees centigrade. I mean, very hot. To produce colours and textures of unequal richness, and that these colours are never going to fade. So if we put shards of them in 5,000 years, well we won't, but 5,000 years, they're still there. And it's not like that very terrifying exhibition I went to in the V&A where, you know, all our mobile phones and computers are all being, apparently, we think they're all being recycled, but they're not. They're going to Inner Mongolia, and they are completely destroying a large part of Mongolia because they're being recycled. And at the V&A at the moment, there are 3 pots, sort of hand-coiled pots, in sort of mother, father and baby one, and they're grey. They're sort of that colour, and they are made entirely out of radioactive industrial waste. And they're going to survive too. But what's so beautiful is that Anthony's made things which are completely countering that, out of the clay on which you're living. I think also we have to remember that, I mean, looking at this, it says here with these wonderful Jun bowls, that's a photograph of them downstairs, which you can look into so magically. It does say that this is one of the most demanding, has always been one of the most demanding and most respected techniques which the great Chinese masters mastered. And if you look at this, which is a superb purple splashed Jun bubble bowl from the Northern Song dynasty, I don't think Anthony's really done any worse than that. I think it's pretty good, and it's sort of 95 euros a throw. I mean, for goodness sake, I hope there's red spots everywhere. And I mean, they're pretty amazing. And I'd just like to finish, you'll be glad to hear, with this. This is an essay. I don't know if anybody knows this book, but actually I always found that students absolutely loved it. It's called Art for Whom and for What, by this man called Brian Keeble. And he's got a chapter on Michael Cardew as the potter, as primordial maker. And I just like to say, this is like sort of church, you know, the end of the sermon, you know, but I've nearly finished. And he says the true potter, and you're called a potter, aren't you? You're not a ceramicist or any of these. You're a potter, good. Or a ceramicist, as they call them in America sometimes. The true potter establishes his workshop where nature provides a plentiful supply of clay. He digs the substance of his trade himself in the immediate environment. The raw clay must be made ready for his work, a process that is demanding of his physical effort. This bodily effort of blending and de-airing the clay allows the potter to establish a rapport, feeling for its possibilities, testing its readiness to receive the imprint of its final shape. For the possibilities of clay belong to clay as to no other substance. Its potentiality for form is unique to itself. The pulse of its life is different from that of stone or wood or metal. This pulse the potter feels and absorbs in the preparation of his material. what might seem to the outsider to be physical drudgery or repetition that could be dispensed with by the use of the machine, once the tension of aching muscles and the stubborn matter of the clay are fused, becomes a subtle process of physical transformation, whereby the resistance of the body is resolved and energized, and the demands of the ego are stilled. The soul of the potter and the soul of the clay must, after all, become one, if there is to be harmony between the worker and his work. In this necessary transmutation, the ego has no place. And I think that that's probably ultimately what emptiness may mean, as well as a sort of... I went to the... on Sunday, I went up to St. Patrick's, and there was... Stuart Kinsler's formed this little group called Peregrine, and they were singing the Thomas Tallis, 12th Wagner. And I went out afterwards, and you say thank you. And Stuart said, we're all on, we're so high up, I don't know if you can see us, because we're completely transported, we're completely elated. And so I think some of that incredible joy in the creation of beauty, that amazing skill, I think we're very privileged to witness. And thank you, Anthony, and don't ever stop being you. And heaven knows how I presume you'll go on making and making more and more beautiful things forever, but don't stop. And it's marvellous. Congratulations. It's a very beautiful show.